The cathedral bells of St. Michael's Basilica rang out in haunting succession, each peal reverberating through my ribs like a funeral dirge. My fingers trembled around the stems of white peonies, their delicate scent turning sickly sweet in the oppressive stillness of the vaulted sanctuary. Low murmurs rippled through the rows behind me, building with each passing minute that Jensen failed to appear at the altar. "He's not coming," my sister Fiona whispered, her palm steady against my bare shoulder blade. I shook my head in refusal, though the borrowed wedding gown, cinched too tightly at my ribs and gaping at the hips, felt like it was constricting my lungs. My 5-year-old daughter, Sky, fidgeted restlessly in the front pew, her flower crown tilted at an angle, already bored by the unexplained delay, mercifully unaware of the public devastation unfolding around her mother. "Just wait," I managed to say, the words barely forming. "Traffic! There could be traffic." But I knew, deep in the marrow of my bones, I knew. The text message that had arrived 45 minutes earlier, the one I'd been too terrified to fully read, now seared itself across my vision like a brand. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now, let's jump right back in. I can't do this, Evelyn. I can't take on someone else's liability. Liability. That single word echoed through my mind like a death sentence. That's what my daughter had become in Jensen's calculation. Not the bright, trusting child who'd called him almost daddy for the past 9 months. Not the little girl who'd drawn him pictures and saved her best smiles for when he walked through the door. Just a burden, a liability he'd decided at the 11th hour he couldn't shoulder. The whispers grew sharper now, more pointed. 91 guests, most from Jensen's professional circles, shifting uncomfortably in the polished pews of St. Michael's. Heads turned toward me, then away quickly when I caught their eyes. I could feel their pity like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. The elderly priest offered me a look of such profound sympathy that bile rose in my throat. "Maybe try calling him one more time," Fiona suggested, though we both understood it was futile. I'd dialed 23 times in the last 40 minutes. 23 calls that had gone straight to voicemail. Each automated response another nail in the coffin of my carefully constructed future. Each unanswered ring had chipped away at my denial until there was nothing left but the raw, bleeding truth. Jensen wasn't stuck in traffic. He wasn't dealing with a car accident or a family emergency. He had simply decided I wasn't worth it. That Sky wasn't worth it. The massive oak doors at the back of the cathedral groaned open, and my heart lurched violently in my chest. For one desperate, pathetic moment, I thought it might be him, that he'd come to his senses, that he'd rushed down the aisle full of apologies and explanations. But it was only my best friend Rachel slipping back inside, her expression twisted with the confirmation of what I already knew. She gave one small, devastating shake of her head. "He left this with the best man," Rachel whispered, pressing a folded note into my shaking hand. "I'm so sorry, Evie." My fingers fumbled with the paper, unfolding it with numb, clumsy movements. Jensen's handwriting, always so precise and controlled, sprawled across the page in hasty scrawl. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. I just can't. You deserve someone who can handle all of this. I'm not that man. Please don't try to find me. Jensen, handle all of this." As if my daughter and I were some kind of crisis to be managed, some burden too heavy for his shoulders. 4 years of struggling alone as a single mother, juggling 2 minimum-wage jobs, finally meeting someone who claimed to accept both me and my daughter, all of it collapsing into this single moment of perfect, public humiliation. The first tear carved a path down my cheek, dragging a stripe of painstakingly applied makeup with it. I'd saved for 3 months to afford that makeup artist, skipping lunches and cutting corners everywhere I could, desperate to feel beautiful for once in my exhausted, overworked life. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd wanted to be beautiful for a man who couldn't even be bothered to show up. Evie, Fiona said softly, her hand tightening on my shoulder. Let me get Sky. We need to leave. I need to get her out of here, I said, my voice splintering into jagged pieces. I can't let her see me like this. But even as I said it, I knew it was already too late. Sky had stopped swinging her legs. She was watching me now with those impossibly perceptive eyes, the ones that saw far too much for a 5-year-old child. She knew something was wrong. She always knew. Behind me, the whispers had transformed into outright conversation. I could hear fragments of it floating through the air like poison. I knew this wouldn't work out. Taking on another man's child, what did she expect? Poor thing. First the father leaves, now this. Each comment was a knife between my ribs. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them they knew nothing about my life, about the sacrifices I'd made, about the nights I'd cried myself to sleep wondering if I was enough for my daughter. But I couldn't find my voice. Shame had wrapped itself around my throat like a noose, choking off any protest. The priest cleared his throat awkwardly, his weathered face creased with concern. Miss Hartley, perhaps we should— He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone in this cathedral knew what came next. The ceremony would be cancelled. The guests would file out in uncomfortable silence. I would gather up the fragments of my dignity and my daughter and walk out of this church into a future that suddenly seemed impossibly dark and uncertain. Fiona moved past me toward Sky, but my daughter was already sliding off the pew, her small patent leather shoes clicking against the marble floor as she approached. Her flower crown sat crooked on her dark curls, white ribbons trailing down her back. She looked up at me with those serious eyes, and my heart shattered all over again. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Sky asked, her small hand finding mine. "Where's Jensen?" I opened my mouth to answer, to find some explanation that wouldn't destroy her faith in people, that wouldn't teach her at 5 years old that men leave, that promises mean nothing, that love is just another word for eventual abandonment. But no words came. My throat was too tight, my chest too constricted with the effort of holding back sobs. "He had to go away, sweetheart," Fiona said, kneeling down to Sky's level when I couldn't speak. "But it's okay. We're all going to go home now." "But what about the wedding?" Sky's lower lip trembled. "What about the cake?" The cake. God, the cake. I'd spent hours with the baker, carefully choosing flavors within my limited budget, making sure there would be a small tier that was just vanilla because that was Sky's favorite. She'd been so excited about that cake, about wearing her fancy dress, about being a flower girl for the first time. "We'll get cake another time. Baby," I managed to whisper, my voice raw and broken. "I promise." Another promise. Another lie. What was I teaching my daughter by making promises I might not be able to keep? Rachel appeared at my other side, her eyes red-rimmed. "Come on, honey. Let's get you out of here. My car's right outside." I nodded mutely, clutching Sky's hand like a lifeline. This was it then. This was how my fairy tale ended, not with a kiss and a happily ever after, but with a crumpled note and a borrowed wedding dress that had never been meant for me anyway. As I turned to face the gauntlet of pitying stares between me and the exit, the massive wooden doors at the cathedral's entrance burst open with such force that the sound cracked through the vaulted space like a gunshot. The noise was so sudden, so violent, that every conversation died mid-sentence. Every head swiveled toward the entrance in perfect, shocked unison, and that's when everything changed. That's when he walked in. He entered like something summoned from darkness itself, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the predatory grace of a man who had never known fear. Two stone-faced men in impeccably tailored black suits flanked him, their sharp eyes sweeping the cathedral with the precision of trained soldiers. But it was the man in the center who commanded every atom of attention in that sacred space, who seemed to pull all the light and air toward himself like gravity. The stranger wore a midnight black suit that looked custom-made, the fabric molded to his powerful frame with the kind of precision that spoke of obscene wealth. But it wasn't the expensive clothing that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the tattoos. Intricate, dark designs crawled up the sides of his neck, disappearing beneath his collar, visible on the backs of his hands where they hung loose at his sides. The ink marked him as something wholly outside the bounds of my ordinary, struggling existence, something dangerous and forbidden. His face was all severe angles and sharp planes, the kind of masculine beauty that belonged on ancient statues or in dark fairy tales about monsters who devoured maidens. Dark hair swept back from his forehead, revealing a face that could have been carved from marble by an artist who understood both violence and desire. He was perhaps in his early 30s, though there was something ageless about him, something that suggested he'd seen and done things that would break lesser men. I didn't know him. I was absolutely certain I'd never seen this man before in my life, yet something about his presence felt eerily, impossibly familiar, like a half-remembered dream that leaves you unsettled long after waking. The cathedral had fallen into the kind of silence that comes from pure shock. No one whispered, no one moved. We were all frozen, caught in the gravitational pull of this stranger's arrival. Behind the central figure, more men filtered through the entrance with military precision. They weren't rushing or making a show of force. They simply moved into position along the walls, near the exits, their stance casual but their eyes alert, watching, waiting. Within seconds, every door, every possible escape route, was quietly, efficiently secured. This wasn't random. This was planned, orchestrated. "Who is that?" Fiona breathed beside me, her fingers digging into my arm with enough force to bruise. I could only shake my head mutely, my throat too tight to form words. Terror had lodged itself in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold, making it difficult to breathe. But beneath the fear was something else, something I didn't want to acknowledge. Fascination. The kind of horrible, irresistible pull you feel standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into the abyss. The stranger's presence commanded absolute dominion as he strode down the center aisle with deliberate, unhurried steps. His polished shoes struck the marble floor with a rhythmic precision that seemed to echo my racing heartbeat. He didn't look at the guests staring at him with open mouths. He didn't acknowledge the priest who had stepped back from the altar, clutching his Bible like a shield. His gaze, piercing and obsidian dark, locked onto me with laser focus, and I felt paralyzed beneath its weight. A prey animal frozen in the moment before the predator strikes. I should run. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to grab Sky and flee, to get as far away from this man as possible. But I couldn't move. My legs had turned to lead. My feet might as well have been nailed to the marble floor. He stopped 3 feet from where I stood, close enough that I caught the scent of expensive cologne, layered over something sharper, something masculine and primal that triggered every survival instinct embedded in my DNA. Close enough that I could see the fine details of the tattoos on his neck, intricate patterns that might have been Cyrillic script woven through thorns and roses. Close enough that I could see my own frightened reflection in his dark, unreadable eyes. Evelyn Hartley. His voice was low and resonant, carrying the ghost of an accent I couldn't quite place. Russian, perhaps. Eastern European. Something that spoke of cold winters and harder men. I managed a jerky nod, my vocal cords seemingly paralyzed by fear and confusion. The wilting peonies shook in my trembling hands, petals beginning to fall like snow onto the marble floor between us. How did this stranger know my name? Why was he here? What did he want? "My name is Nikolai Volkov." He spoke it with the confidence of a man accustomed to recognition, as though the syllables themselves should trigger immediate understanding, perhaps even terror. A subtle crease appeared between his dark brows when my expression remained blank, uncomprehending. He studied my face for a long moment, and I watched something shift in his eyes, a flicker of surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. "You don't know who I am," he said, and it wasn't a question so much as a statement of fact that seemed to genuinely puzzle him. I shook my head anyway, my voice lost somewhere in the tightness of my throat. The name carried no meaning for me, summoned no recognition from the depths of my memory. Nikolai Volkov. It sounded foreign and dangerous, but it was just a name that clearly should have meant something, judging by the sudden tension I could feel radiating from the guests behind me. His dark eyes flicked briefly to the empty space beside me, the spot where Jensen should have been standing, where he'd promised to stand just 3 weeks ago when we'd rehearsed this moment. Then his gaze returned to me, heavy with something that looked almost like pity. "Your fiancé," he said the word with such thinly veiled contempt that it felt like a slap, "isn't coming." "I know," I whispered, fresh humiliation scorching through me at having this dangerous stranger bear witness to my rejection, to my complete and utter failure. My cheeks burned with shame. Nikolai's jaw tightened, the movement almost imperceptible, but somehow conveying a wealth of controlled anger. He worked for me, indirectly, through a series of business connections. He owed me a substantial debt. The cathedral had fallen into absolute breathless silence. I could feel 91 pairs of eyes boring into my back, watching this exchange unfold like spectators at a car accident, unable to look away from the carnage. Even the priest had gone completely still, his weathered hands clutching his Bible with white-knuckled intensity. "I don't understand," I managed to say, fighting to keep my voice steady even as my world tilted sideways. "Jensen never mentioned any debt. He never mentioned you." "He wouldn't have told you," Nikolai continued with that same smooth, almost gentle tone that somehow made his words more frightening. "The debt was significant, substantial. He believed that marrying you would complicate his ability to repay it." The implication struck me like a physical blow, knocking what little air remained from my lungs. Jensen had abandoned me at the altar not only because of Sky, not only because my daughter represented a liability he couldn't handle, but because of money. Because he owed this tattooed, dangerous man standing before me, this Nikolai Volkov, who commanded enough power to fill a cathedral with armed guards without warning or hesitation. "Who are you?" I asked again, though cold dread was already coiling in the pit of my stomach like a living thing. "What kind of business are you in?" The corner of his mouth lifted fractionally, and the expression wasn't quite a smile. It was something darker, more knowing. The kind your fiancé should have been far more careful about crossing. Before I could process that ominous statement, Nikolai continued, his voice carrying through the silent church with perfect clarity. "Your fiancé stole from me, Miss Hartley. Did you know that?" "No," I breathed, the word barely audible. "No, that's not possible. Jensen was an accountant. He worked for a consulting firm. He wouldn't—" "He diverted funds," Nikolai said, cutting through my desperate protests with ruthless precision. $2 million to be exact. He thought I wouldn't notice. He thought he was clever enough to hide the theft in layers of transactions and shell companies. That dangerous, almost smile appeared again. "But I notice everything, Evelyn Hartley. Everything. $2 million. The number was so staggering, so incomprehensible, that I couldn't fully grasp it. That was more money than I would see in multiple lifetimes of working my 2 minimum wage jobs. That was the kind of money that people killed for. "I had nothing to do with that," I said, finding a thin thread of defiance beneath the crushing weight of my shame and fear. "I didn't know about any of this, I swear." "I know." Nikolai's gaze softened fractionally, the shift so subtle I might have imagined it if I hadn't been staring directly into his eyes. "You're collateral damage in his escape plan. He never intended to marry you, Miss Hartley. He needed a respectable facade, a family man image, while he prepared to disappear with my money. Each word was another crack in the fragile fiction I'd built around Jensen and our relationship. Had it all been a carefully orchestrated lie from the very beginning? His affection for Sky, his promises to give us the stable family we deserved, his patient courtship when I'd been so hesitant to let another man into our lives. Had every moment, every kiss, every whispered promise been nothing but theater, a performance designed to create the illusion of respectability while he plotted his theft and escape? He used you, Nikolai continued, his voice dropping lower, almost gentle in its brutal honesty. He needed the appearance of settling down, of being a stable family man, to avoid suspicion while he moved my money into accounts I couldn't trace. You and your daughter were his cover, nothing more. The truth of it settled over me like a shroud. Of course, it explained so much. Why Jensen had pursued me so persistently, despite my initial reluctance. Why he'd been so eager to be seen with Sky in public, taking her to the park, to school events, making sure everyone saw him playing the role of devoted almost stepfather. Why he'd pushed for a quick engagement, a fast wedding. He'd needed us, but not in the way I desperately hoped. The debt must be paid, Nikolai said, his voice returning to that commanding tone that seemed to reverberate in my chest. One way or another. That's not negotiable. Fear gripped me with icy fingers. I don't have any money, I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. I barely make enough to cover rent and groceries. I have maybe $300 in savings. You can have it all, but I don't have anything close to what you're talking about. I know your financial situation, he interrupted, and the casual revelation that he possessed such intimate knowledge of my life sent a shiver down my spine. I'm not interested in your minimal savings, Evelyn. $300 means nothing to me. Then what do you want? My voice was barely a whisper now, my throat tight with dread. Nikolai glanced down at the empty space beside me again, then swept his gaze across the confused, frightened faces of my family and friends in the pews before settling back on me with calculated intensity. Your fiancé has stolen $2 million from me, he said, speaking quietly, but with such absolute authority that every word carried through the silent cathedral. He's fled the country with my money, leaving you standing here to face the consequences of his actions. That makes you the only available collateral. Gasps rippled through the assembled guests like a wave breaking on shore. I heard my sister Fiona step forward, her voice sharp with protective anger. You can't be serious. She didn't do anything. She's innocent. Nikolai didn't even glance in her direction. His eyes remained fixed on mine with unsettling, unwavering intensity, watching my reaction with the focus of a scientist observing an experiment. The debt will be settled today, he said, each word precise and deliberate. Either through your cooperation or through other means. Your ex-fiancé has family, I believe. Elderly parents, a younger sister with 2 children. They all have assets that could be liquidated to recover what's owed to me. The threat was crystalline, sharp as broken glass. My eyes darted involuntarily to the third pew where Jensen's parents sat, their faces pale and confused as they struggled to comprehend what was happening. Harold was 72 with a bad heart. Susan had just recovered from breast cancer. They were kind, gentle people who'd welcomed me warmly into their family, who'd never done anything to deserve being caught in this nightmare. You would hurt innocent people over money? I asked, disgust rising within me like bile. Business is business, Nikolai said with a slight tilt of his head. I prefer more elegant solutions when they're available. Don't you? Before I could respond, before I could process the impossible choice he was laying before me, I felt a small tug on my dress. I looked down to find Sky standing beside me, her flower crown askew, her small fingers wrapped around a handful of my borrowed gown. She'd approached so quietly that neither of us had noticed. And now she stood there looking up at Nikolai with those wide, curious eyes that saw everything. "Mommy," she said in that clear, carrying voice that children have. "Who is this man? Is he why Jensen didn't come?" Something extraordinary happened then. Nikolai's entire demeanor shifted. The hard, dangerous edges seemed to soften as he looked down at my daughter. He lowered himself gracefully to one knee, bringing himself to Sky's eye level with surprising gentleness. The movement was so smooth, so natural, that it seemed almost rehearsed. The men flanking him tensed immediately, their hands moving subtly toward their jackets, but Nikolai raised one hand slightly, and they froze in place. "Hello, little one," he said, and his voice had transformed completely. It was still deep, still resonant, but the edge of threat had vanished, replaced by something warmer, almost tender. "What's your name?" "I'm Sky. I'm 5 years old." She held up 5 fingers with solemn pride, seemingly unafraid of the dangerous stranger kneeling before her. "Are you a friend of Jensen's?" Something dark and almost amused flickered across Nikolai's tattooed features. "No, Cynthia. I'm not Jensen's friend." Sky considered this with the serious contemplation that only small children can manage, her head tilting slightly as she processed the information. "Is that why he's not here? Because he's scared of you?" A surprised sound escaped Nikolai, rich and genuine, briefly transforming his severe face. "Yes, little one, that's exactly why." He stood again with that same fluid grace, his attention returning to me, but something had shifted in his expression. His gaze lingered on my face with renewed intensity, assessing, calculating. I had the deeply unsettling sensation that he was seeing far beyond my smeared makeup and devastation, seeing something I couldn't identify or understand. Before he could speak again, Fiona grabbed my arm with bruising force and pulled me several steps away from Nikolai and his watchful guards. Her face was twisted with panic, her whisper urgent and desperate. "Evelyn, you need to listen to me right now. We need to call the police. This man is threatening you, threatening Jensen's family. This is extortion. It's illegal." I glanced over at Nikolai, who stood calmly near the altar now, seemingly giving us space for our private conversation. But I noticed how one of his men had shifted closer to us, pretending to examine the stained glass window, but clearly positioned to listen. These weren't amateurs. These were professionals who'd done this before. "Look at them, Fee," I murmured, keeping my voice low. "Really look at them. Do you honestly think the local police can protect us from whatever this is? From whoever he is?" "But they can arrest him," Fiona hissed. "He just threatened innocent people in front of 90 witnesses." "And then what?" I asked, feeling exhaustion settle over me like a weight. "Do you think he came here without a plan? Without lawyers? Without the kind of money and power that makes legal problems disappear? Look at his suit. Look at those men. This isn't some street thug, Fiona. This is someone with real resources, real connections." "So what? You're just going to give up? Let him bully you into God knows what?" I looked down at Sky, who had wandered back to the front pew and was swinging her legs again, humming softly to herself. Jensen did steal from him. There's truth in that part at least. And if Nikolai wanted to hurt us, really hurt us, would he be standing here talking? Or would something worse have already happened? Fiona's eyes filled with tears of frustration and fear. "You're scaring me, Evie. You're talking like you're actually considering whatever insane thing he's about to propose." Before I could respond, Nikolai spoke from behind us, his voice carrying just enough to reach our ears. "The police would be a waste of everyone's time, Miss Hartley, but you're welcome to try if it would make you feel better." We both turned to find him watching us with those dark, unreadable eyes. He hadn't moved from his position near the altar, but somehow his presence seemed to fill the entire cathedral. "I know about your struggles, Evelyn," he continued, and there was something almost gentle in his tone now, something that felt more dangerous than his earlier threats. "The 2 jobs. Waitressing at the diner on weekdays, Cleaning offices at night on weekends, the late rent payments, the payday loans you took out last month and the month before, the notice from your landlord about potential eviction. Each revelation felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. How did he know these things? How long had he been watching me? I know about Sky's father, Nikolai said, his voice dropping lower. How he left when you were 6 months pregnant. How he's never paid a single dollar in child support. How you had to drop out of college in your junior year because you couldn't afford both tuition and diapers. My hands had started shaking again. This wasn't just surface information. This was intimate knowledge of my life, my failures, my deepest struggles. I know about the medical bills, he continued relentlessly. Sky's asthma, the emergency room visit last winter when she couldn't breathe, the inhaler prescriptions you can barely afford, the specialist appointments you keep canceling because you can't take time off work without losing shifts you desperately need. Stop, I whispered. But he didn't stop. I know you haven't bought yourself new clothes in over a year, that you eat peanut butter sandwiches for dinner most nights, so Sky can have proper meals, that you walk 40 minutes to work every day because you can't afford the bus fare, that you lie awake at 3 in the morning, wondering how you're going to keep going, how you're going to give your daughter the life she deserves. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and shameful. He'd laid my entire life bare in front of all these people, exposed every failure, every inadequacy, every desperate struggle I'd tried so hard to hide. I straightened my shoulders and walked back toward Nikolai, forcing myself to meet his gaze despite the tears still wet on my cheeks. The torn hem of my borrowed wedding dress dragged slightly on the marble floor, a pathetic whisper with each step. Around me, I could feel the weight of 91 pairs of eyes watching this exchange, but I pushed their stares from my mind. This was about survival now, about Sky's future, about making an impossible choice in an impossible situation. Have you reached a decision? Nikolai asked, his voice calm and measured, as though we were discussing a business contract rather than the rest of our lives. I need to understand something first, I said, finding unexpected resolve in the dire circumstances. My voice was steadier than I felt. Why marriage? If this is really about punishing Jensen or recovering your money, there are simpler ways. You could go after his assets, his bank accounts. You clearly have the resources and connections to track him down wherever he's run to. So why this? Why me? A flicker of what might have been appreciation crossed his features. Intelligent question, he said, and I couldn't tell if he was mocking me or genuinely impressed. This isn't about punishing Jensen, though I admit that's an enjoyable side benefit. Your ex-fiancé will face consequences for his theft in due time, I assure you. But this, what I'm proposing to you right now, this is about what I want. And what exactly do you want? I asked, my voice barely steady despite my best efforts. Nikolai's dark eyes held mine with uncomfortable intensity. A wife. A family. His gaze shifted briefly to Sky, who was still swinging her legs in the front pew, oblivious to the life-altering negotiation happening just feet away. You, both of you. A chill ran through me at the simple, possessive declaration. But why me? I pressed, needing to understand. You're clearly wealthy, powerful. There must be dozens of women who would jump at the chance to marry you. Women without complications, without children, without all the baggage I come with. I don't want dozens of women, he said, cutting through my protests with smooth certainty. I want you. I've watched you for months, Evelyn. Your loyalty, your strength, your absolute devotion to your daughter. The way you work yourself into exhaustion rather than compromise your principles. The way you never complain, never give up. Even when everything is falling apart around you, these qualities are rare, valuable. The revelation that he'd been observing me, studying my life without my knowledge or consent, should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a disturbing ripple of something else, something that might have been flattery in any other circumstance. Someone had been paying attention. Someone had seen my struggles and valued them rather than judging them as weakness. That's not normal, I said, fighting to maintain my grip on reality. That's stalking. That's due diligence, he corrected, completely unperturbed by the accusation. I don't enter into permanent arrangements lightly. I needed to know who you are, what you're made of, whether you could handle the life I'm offering. Arrangements, I repeated, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Not marriages, arrangements. His mouth curved into the barest hint of a smile, and there was something almost kind in the expression. Would you prefer I pretend this is a love match? That I've been overcome by romantic feelings and swept off my feet by your beauty? I respect you too much for such comfortable fiction, Evelyn. This is an arrangement that benefits us both. I gain a wife with qualities I genuinely admire and value. You and your daughter gain protection, security, and a future far better than anything you could provide working 2 jobs for the rest of your life. I stared at him for a long moment, my mind racing through impossible calculations. He was offering me a way out of poverty, a way to give Sky everything I'd never been able to provide. But the cost was surrendering myself to a man I didn't know. A man who was clearly dangerous, who operated outside the law, who commanded armed men and spoke of million-dollar thefts as casually as discussing the weather. If I agree to this, I said slowly, carefully, I have conditions, 3 of them, non-negotiable. Nikolai's eyebrows rose slightly, and that hint of appreciation returned to his dark eyes. I'm listening. First, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. Sky comes first. Always. In every decision, every situation. Her safety, her happiness, her well-being are the priority. If you can't agree to that, then we have nothing to discuss. Nikolai nodded slowly. Agreed. I would expect nothing less from you. Second, I continued, I finished my degree. I had 2 years left when I had to drop out. I want to go back to school. I want to be able to support myself if I ever need to. Something flickered in his eyes, respect perhaps. Also agreed. I'll arrange for your enrollment at whatever university you choose. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the final condition. Third, you don't lie to me about who you are, what you do, the dangers I might be walking into. I deserve honesty about the world I'm entering, even if the truth is ugly. Especially because the truth is ugly, Nikolai said quietly. Yes, Evelyn, I can promise you honesty, even when you wish I hadn't been so forthcoming. He extended his hand toward me, and I stared at it for a long moment before placing my trembling fingers in his. His grip was warm, firm, and somehow reassuring despite everything. Then we have an agreement, he said. But instead of leading me toward the altar, Nikolai turned and walked to where Sky sat in the front pew. He knelt down again, bringing himself to her eye level with that same surprising gentleness he'd shown before. Sky, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent cathedral. I need to ask you something very important, man to woman. Sky giggled at being called a woman, but she sat up straighter, clearly taking the moment seriously. I would like to marry your mother, Nikolai said. But I won't do it without your permission. This is your family, and I'm asking to become part of it. What do you think? My daughter looked at him with those serious eyes, considering. Will you make my mommy cry like Jensen did? No, Cynthia, Nikolai said, and there was steel beneath the gentleness now. I promise you, I will never make your mother cry the way that coward did. I will protect her, protect both of you. That's what family does. Sky studied his face for another moment, then nodded decisively. Okay, you can marry my mommy, but you have to promise to come to my dance recitals. Jensen always said he would come and then he never did. I promise, Nikolai said solemnly. Every single one. He stood and returned to me, offering his hand again. This time I took it without hesitation, and he led me to the altar where the priest stood, looking utterly bewildered by the rapid turn of events. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. The priest stumbled through the traditional words, clearly uncertain whether he should be performing this wedding at all, but too intimidated by Nikolai's presence to refuse. I heard myself repeating vows I'd expected to say to Jensen, words about love and honor that felt hollow in my mouth. But when Nikolai spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure, his dark eyes never leaving mine. I, Nikolai Volkov, take you, Evelyn Hartley, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to protect you and your daughter, to provide for you both, to be honest with you even when the truth is difficult. I will honor the conditions you've set, and I will never abandon you the way lesser men have. Then the priest said the words that sealed my fate. You may kiss the bride. Nikolai's hand cupped my face with surprising tenderness, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. Then he leaned in and pressed his lips to mine. The kiss was potent and unexpected, not brutal, but not gentle either. It was possessive and claiming, a promise and a warning all at once. When he pulled back, I was breathless and dizzy, my heart racing for reasons I didn't want to examine. I was Mrs. Volkov now. The cathedral doors closed behind us with a finality that echoed through my chest. Nikolai's hand remained firmly at the small of my back as he guided me down the stone steps toward a gleaming black sedan idling at the curb. The vehicle was enormous, the kind of car I'd only ever seen in movies about crime lords and foreign dignitaries. Its windows were tinted so dark they looked like mirrors reflecting the afternoon sun. One of Nikolai's men moved ahead to open the rear door, and I hesitated on the sidewalk, suddenly aware that once I got into that car, there would be no going back. This was real. I'd actually married a complete stranger, a dangerous man with tattoos crawling up his neck and armed guards following his every command. "Mommy, can I sit by the window?" Sky's excited voice broke through my paralysis. She was already tugging on my hand, eager to climb into what must have seemed like the fanciest car she'd ever seen. "Of course, Cynthia," Nikolai said before I could respond. He lifted Sky easily and settled her into the far seat, then offered me his hand to help me navigate the vehicle in my wedding dress. The interior was even more luxurious than I'd imagined. Soft leather seats the color of cream, wood paneling that gleamed in the dim light, enough space that it felt more like a living room than a car. Nikolai slid in beside me, and the door closed with a solid, expensive thunk that seemed to seal us away from the world outside. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice sounding small and uncertain. "Home," Nikolai replied simply. "Your new home." The driver pulled away from the curb smoothly, and I watched through the tinted windows as St. Michael's Basilica grew smaller behind us. Fiona stood on the steps, her face a mask of worry and fear. I raised my hand in a small wave, not knowing when I'd see my sister again, not knowing what my life would look like from this moment forward. "Are you thirsty, Sky?" Nikolai asked, reaching for a small refrigerated compartment built into the seat in front of us. "Yes, please," Sky said, her eyes wide with wonder at all the car's features. He pulled out a juice box, the exact brand I usually bought for her at the discount grocery store when I could afford it. Apple juice, her favorite. The detail was so specific, so deliberate, that it sent another chill down my spine. He really had been watching us for months. "Thank you," Sky said politely, taking the juice box and immediately stabbing the straw through the hole with practiced ease. Nikolai pressed a button, and soft lights illuminated the car's ceiling, gentle and warm. "So you can see better, little one," he said. I watched this exchange in stunned silence. This was the same man who'd threatened Jensen's elderly parents less than an hour ago. The same man who'd commandeered my wedding and forced me into marriage under threat of violence. Yet with Sky, he was patient and considerate, anticipating her needs with surprising accuracy. "And you, Evelyn?" He turned to me, and his dark eyes seemed to soften slightly in the dim light. "Are you all right?" "I know this has been overwhelming." "Overwhelming," I repeated, and a slightly hysterical laugh escaped me. "That's one word for it." He studied my face with that same intense focus I was beginning to recognize as characteristic of him. You're stronger than you realize. You just negotiated terms with one of the most dangerous men on the East Coast while wearing a borrowed wedding dress and fighting back tears. That takes courage. It takes desperation, I corrected. Perhaps, he acknowledged, but you could have simply agreed to everything I demanded. Instead, you set boundaries. You protected your daughter and your future. That's not desperation, Evelyn. That's strength. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I turned my attention to the window, watching the city streets give way to highway, then gradually to more rural landscapes. Trees lined the road now, their late autumn leaves still clinging to branches. We were heading away from everything I knew, every landmark I recognized. How far is it? I asked after perhaps 20 minutes of silence broken only by Sky's soft humming as she looked out her window. Another 15 minutes, Nikolai replied. The estate is outside the city limits, more private, more secure. Estate. The word conjured images of sprawling mansions and manicured grounds, the kind of wealth I'd only seen on television. The kind of life that existed in a completely different universe from my tiny two-bedroom apartment, with its peeling paint and broken heater. The car turned off the main highway onto a smaller road, then through a massive iron gate that opened automatically as we approached. A long driveway stretched ahead, lined with towering oak trees that formed a canopy overhead. And at the end of that driveway, illuminated by the fading afternoon light, stood a house that took my breath away. It wasn't just large, it was magnificent. 3 stories of pale stone and tall windows, with wings extending on either side of a central entrance. This wasn't a home. This was a fortress disguised as elegance. "Welcome home, Mrs. Volkov," Nikolai said quietly. And despite everything, despite the fear and uncertainty and surreal horror of the day, I felt something unexpected flutter in my chest. Hope. The car came to a stop in front of the massive entrance, and before I could reach for the door handle, one of Nikolai's men had already opened it from the outside. Sky bounced out eagerly, her flower crown finally falling completely off as she stared up at the towering facade of our new home. I followed more slowly, my legs unsteady after the surreal journey, still unable to fully process that this was happening, that this was real. "It's like a castle, Mommy," Sky breathed, and she wasn't entirely wrong. The front doors opened before we reached them, revealing an older woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a neat twist. She wore a simple black dress and an expression of professional warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Volkov," she said with a slight nod. "Welcome home. And welcome, Mrs. Volkov." The name sounded foreign, wrong somehow, attached to me like a label that didn't quite fit. "This is Helena," Nikolai said, his hand still at my back. "She manages the household staff. If you need anything at all, you speak with her." Helena's gaze softened slightly as it landed on Sky. "And this must be Miss Sky. I've prepared a room for you, dear. Would you like to see it?" Sky looked up at me for permission, and I nodded, not trusting my voice. Helena extended her hand, and my daughter took it without hesitation, already chattering about whether there might be toys in her new room as they disappeared into the depths of the house. Suddenly, I was alone with Nikolai in the vast entrance hall, and the weight of everything that had happened crashed down on me with renewed force. The marble floors gleamed beneath my feet. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, catching the fading sunlight and scattering it into rainbow fragments. This was wealth beyond anything I'd ever imagined, and it terrified me. "I need to know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What you do. Your business. If I'm going to live here, if my daughter is going to live here, I need to understand what I've gotten us into." Nikolai studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Follow me." He led me through a series of hallways, each more opulent than the last, until we reached a set of double doors. He opened them to reveal a study lined with bookshelves, dominated by a massive desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of dark wood. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter and handed one to me before settling into one of the leather chairs near an unlit fireplace. I took the chair opposite him, the wedding dress pooling around my feet like a ridiculous reminder of how this day had started. "I run an organization," Nikolai began, his voice matter-of-fact. "What some people would call the Russian mafia, though we prefer to think of ourselves as businessmen who operate outside traditional legal structures. We control shipping routes, construction contracts, certain political connections. We provide protection to businesses that need it, facilitate transactions that banks won't touch, and recover debts that the legal system can't or won't pursue." I took a sip of the liquor, feeling it burn down my throat. "So you're a criminal?" "By the letter of the law, yes," he acknowledged without shame. "By my own moral code, I'm a man who provides services and expects payment for them. Your ex-fiancé stole from me, so I collected what was owed." "By forcing me to marry you," I said bitterly. "By offering you an alternative to watching innocent people suffer for his crimes," Nikolai corrected. "You had a choice, Evelyn. It may not have been a pleasant choice, but it was a choice nonetheless." I couldn't argue with that, much as I wanted to. He was right. I could have refused, could have let him go after Jensen's family, could have called the police despite knowing they'd be useless. I'd chosen this path, no matter how impossible the circumstances had made any other option seem. "Why me, though?" I asked again, needing to understand. "Really, you said you've been watching me for months. You could have any woman you wanted. Women who understand your world, who wouldn't be shocked by what you do, who could actually be useful to you. I'm just a struggling single mother who can barely keep food on the table. What could you possibly want with someone like me?" Nikolai leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his dark eyes intense and unwavering. "Everything you just described is exactly why I want you. You're not part of this world, Evelyn. You're not corrupted by it, not desensitized to violence and greed. You work 2 jobs you hate to provide for your daughter. You sacrifice your own needs for hers without hesitation. You have principles you won't compromise even when it would be easier. In my world, those qualities are nearly impossible to find." He paused, taking a sip of his own drink. "I need someone real, someone who will keep me tethered to something beyond power and money, someone who will remind me why any of this matters. And I need a mother for the children I intend to have. Someone who will raise them with the kind of fierce devotion you show Sky." The casual mention of children sent a jolt through me. "You're talking about years from now, surely." "I'm talking about our future," he said simply. "However long that takes to develop naturally." "And in the meantime?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "What are the expectations of our living arrangement, of this marriage?" Nikolai set his glass down and stood, moving to the window that overlooked the sprawling grounds. "You'll have your own suite of rooms. Your privacy will be respected until you decide otherwise. I won't force intimacy on you, Evelyn. When and if that aspect of our marriage develops, it will be because you want it to, not because you feel obligated." The relief that flooded through me was so intense I felt dizzy. "Thank you." He turned back to face me, and something in his expression had softened. "I want a real marriage eventually, a real family, but I'm patient, and I understand that trust takes time to build, especially when the foundation is as unconventional as ours." I stood as well, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the nightmare of this day was finally draining away, leaving me hollow and shaky. "I'd like to see Sky. Make sure she's settling in all right." "Of course." Nikolai moved to the door and opened it for me. "Helena will show you to your rooms. Rest, Evelyn. Tomorrow we'll discuss the practical aspects of your new life, enrolling you in school, establishing routines for Sky. But tonight, just rest." As I walked past him into the hallway, his hand caught my wrist gently. I looked back, startled. You made the right choice, he said quietly. I know it doesn't feel that way now, but you will be safe here, both of you. That's my promise to you, as your husband. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and followed Helena's distant figure through the labyrinth of my new home, wondering what kind of life I'd just sentenced myself and my daughter to, and whether the security Nikolai promised would be worth the price of my freedom. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.